Hello, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Thanks for streaming with us. Day 11 of testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. A former stylist for Sean Diddy Combs taking the stand, testifying about the tumultuous relationship between Cassie Ventura and the music mogul, saying he heard Combs call Ventura insulting names and threatened to beat her. The stylist also testified he heard Combs tell Cassie that he wouldn't put her music out, that he would get her parents fired from their jobs, that he would put out sex tapes. Now, earlier today, the judge denying the defense's motion for a mistrial after a Los Angeles Fire Department arson investigator testified that fingerprint evidence from the suspected break-in of rapper Kid Cudi's house was destroyed. That investigator testified he did not order the prints destroyed. The fire department concluding that the 2012 fire set inside Kid Cudi's car was caused by a makeshift firebomb known as a Molotov cocktail. The investigator telling the jury, quote, "Somebody had lit it, cut the roof, and dropped it in the front seat. In my opinion, it was targeted." And weeks after testifying as the prosecution's star witness, we learned today that Cassie Ventura has given birth to her third child. Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges. His defense team says any sexual encounters were consensual. If convicted, Combs faces the possibility of life in prison. We have our team closely following the case from inside the courtroom, but we begin outside the federal courthouse in Manhattan with Aaron Katersky, our chief investigative correspondent. Aaron, the trial might be here in New York, but much of today's testimony was about something that happened in Los Angeles.
Right in the Hollywood Hills, Eva, when Kid Cudi says his Porsche 911 Cabriolet was torched with a Molotov cocktail. And Lance Jimenez, the LA Fire Department arson investigator who responded, showed the jury pictures of everything that he encountered. The 40-ounce bottle of malt liquor, Old English 800, was the bottle used to make the Molotov cocktail. There was what he described as a fancy handkerchief or some kind of cloth used as the wick. Gasoline in the bottle dropped through a slit that was cut in the canvas roof of the sports car. But all of that paled in comparison to the fingerprints that Jimenez revealed had been discovered at Kid Cudi's house. Apparently, Eva, after the earlier break-in at Kid Cudi's house, and remember there's been testimony that Sean Combs and a bodyguard ended up at Kid Cudi's house after he got upset that Kid Cudi had been dating Cassie Ventura. After that break-in, apparently Kid Cudi had his whole house swept for fingerprints and apparently gave the arson investigator 2 prints that were lifted from the glass door.
Aaron, there was also a lot made about this black glove that was found. What was that all about?
This was on cross-examination, and I think the goal of the defense was to try to undermine the credibility of the investigation, maybe suggest that the arson investigator had done a shoddy job, because the defense kept harping on this single black driving glove that was found on the back seat, maybe insinuating that, I don't know, Kid Cudi lit his own car on fire. It wasn't clear where the defense was going, but ultimately the arson investigator said the glove wasn't terribly significant because Kid Cudi told him it was his.
At one point today, Sean Combs' defense team asked the judge to declare a mistrial. What led up to that?
So Jimenez was talking about the fingerprints that had been found on the glass door of Kid Cudi's house. And I think the implication was he could have used them to compare fingerprints lifted from some of the evidence at the arson scene in the driveway. But he told federal prosecutors that the prints were somehow destroyed while they were in the custody of the LAPD. And when federal prosecutor Christy Slavic asked Jimenez, is that unusual for evidence to be destroyed during an ongoing investigation, the defense jumped up to object, and outside the presence of the jury, called prosecutors outrageous. The defense saw the question as an attempt to drop an inference in the jurors' minds that somehow Combs was responsible and could buy his way out of trouble by paying off someone at the LAPD to destroy evidence. The judge didn't see it that way. He denied the mistrial, but the defense was sure upset for a minute, Eva.
Combs' ex, Cassie Ventura, not in court today, but still making headlines.
She had a baby, her third child, and that comes, 2 weeks after she gave such a dramatic, emotional, disturbing, graphic testimony here in court. In fact, her former stylist, Deonte Nash, ended up saying congratulations from the witness stand, and that was sort of everybody's confirmation that she had the baby. And we don't know any more details than that, but after such a wrenching time on the witness stand, a happier moment for Cassie Ventura and her husband.
What were Combs' reaction to today's testimony? Was his family there with him today?
3 sons were there in the row where they'd been sitting. His mother was there. Combs actually seemed like he was in a pretty good mood today. He was laughing quite a lot and consulting with his lawyers, gesturing to people in the audience.
Aaron Katersky, thank you so much for being with us. I want to bring in our ABC News legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer, to break down the testimony that we saw on the witness stand today. Brian, let's get straight into it. So what was your big moment of the day?
It's got to be the request for the mistrial, but even more so than that, the lead up to it. And now Aaron Katersky did bring it up, but give you a little bit more context. It was very clear what the government was doing, at least from a defense attorney's eyes, that there were fingerprints found at the home during the arson investigation that was tied to an earlier incident, being the burglary. There's fingerprints on the vehicle, and that these fingerprints had disappeared. The government went in on question after question as to how these fingerprints would be destroyed properly and that the proper process did not actually happen here, and then ultimately suggesting that they were just gone. But the judge said that the prosecution did not go one step further of getting the answer as to whether or not this was unusual, and so application for a mistrial is denied, according to the judge.
Okay, there was this LAPD officer who responded to that reported break-in at Kid Cudi's home. Walk us through that investigation.
So we've heard about this initial incident when it comes to the alleged burglary, which this law enforcement officer actually put down in his report is a trespass. And now, just for explanation, burglary is trespass plus. So like trespassing to someone's home and stealing inside, or trespassing to someone's home and committing a felony therein. So calling it just a simple trespass suggested that he did not see any evidence of a further crime inside. But he did go inside, ask questions, ask follow-up as to who he should contact. Capricorn Clark was someone he's supposed to follow up with. Cassie Ventura was someone he's supposed to follow up with. But according to him, even though he reached out multiple times, they did not get back to him. And the defense tried to make it seem like he only started reaching out to women after he found there was female DNA on the crime scene, specifically that Molotov cocktail. But that information never really got out through cross-examination, just the insinuation of it.
Okay, so that arson investigator, let's talk about him and the evidence that he potentially found. What did he find?
A lot. Okay, so we've already saw some of the photos of the damage to Kid Cudi's Porsche 911, but we also saw evidence of a lighter that was left not too far from the vehicle, as well as this container and the bottle of malt liquor that was, you can zoom in, you can really see how much gasoline was still in there that the arson expert said that he can smell, but also tested and confirmed. And then of course you have like this silk kind of fabric here that we believe was inside of this Molotov cocktail, fell out, was damaged in many ways. They called it a designer piece of silk, and that's why it kind of fell apart. And we don't see the damage you typically see from a Molotov cocktail that firebombs a place. But these evidence were collected and shown to the jury as to how this investigation rolled out for the arsonist.
A designer piece of silk?
Yeah, he was able to say that because of this portion here that's not burnt, you can see that one, it was like silky and very soft, and also the design on it. The investigator kept calling it a designer piece of silk, which at least in my mind, I'm like, okay, so who would have a designer piece of silk that you might use a Molotov cocktail? When they were talking about the bottle, I was shocked that it was malt liquor and not another bottle that might be signature to Sean Combs, but they tried to insinuate that maybe designer made it had something to do with who did it.
Okay, let's talk about that black glove. I asked Aaron about this as well. It was found in the car. Is that important?
So I think when it comes to the defense's case, there's not going to be one piece of evidence that you're going to say, you know what, this black glove is the reason why you must acquit. It's not that kind of case. But it was a small piece of evidence where they were trying to insinuate that the person who threw the Molotov cocktail inside of this car might have been using that black glove to protect themselves, and that the investigator should have investigated, should have seen what the DNA was, instead of simply taking the word of Kid Cudi to say that a single glove, because they couldn't find the other one, was his, and they should not test it or check it, saying that the alleged victim here is directing the investigation and not the people who are investigating the case.
Brian Buckmeyer, always so good to have you break this down for us. Thank you so much. Well, the show is called Burden of Proof, and that burden, well, it rests on the prosecution. And here's the superseding indictment that they brought against Sean Combs. The very first count Diddy is facing: racketeering conspiracy. The indictment accused Combs of creating a criminal enterprise with members and associates engaging in crimes like sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. But what exactly is racketeering conspiracy? To break it all down for us, I want to bring in Michael Bachner. He's a criminal defense attorney here in New York City who is not involved in this case. Michael, thank you so much for being with us. Okay, so Combs has denied the accusations, pleaded not guilty, but help us understand exactly what he's accused of. What is racketeering conspiracy?
So the Racketeering Act, also known as RICO, came about in 1970 and was really established to fight organized crime, but it's been morphed into prosecuting people in gangs, in legitimate businesses, etc. So basically the government's got to prove that there was an enterprise. The enterprise is a partnership, a corporation, a group of people acting together like a gang. And that can be an enterprise. They then have to show that there was a pattern of activity. So that pattern could be that they have to demonstrate that 2 predicate acts were committed during the course of a 10-year period of time. Those predicate acts can be the bribery that's been alleged that occurred with Mr. Flores. It could be the arson. It could be the burglary. They've alleged particular patterns of conduct in the indictment. Then they have to show there's something called continuity. Continuity means that these are patterns of conduct that occurred over a prolonged period of time. They didn't just occur in a week or 2 weeks or a month, but that there's a fear that this type of conduct will continue into the future. And then they have to show, of course, that the defendant, that is Mr. Combs, that there was a hierarchy, a structure involved, and that Mr. Combs either ran it or participated in it along with other conspirators. And contrary to what people believe, you don't have to name the other conspirators in the indictment by name. You don't have to charge them. You just have to allege that they existed and call them as witnesses or produce evidence that there was more than one person, that is Combs and one other person at least.
Okay, you mentioned it, but we keep hearing this term RICO in this case. What exactly is that? How tough is it to get a RICO conviction on something like this?
So RICO, this Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, it's a tough type of charge to prove, basically because it's kind of complicated. The jury's going to get the law from the judge, and the judge is going to say, ladies and gentlemen, to convict Mr. Combs, you have to find, first of all, there was this Combs enterprise. That is, there was a hierarchy, a structure that Mr. Combs ran, was part of, etc. Then you're going to have to show that there was this pattern of activity. You're going to have to find that he at least committed or was involved in or directed the commission of an arson, a burglary, the bribery, the sex trafficking, some of the acts alleged in the indictment, which the judge will instruct the jury on. And then he's going to say that you must find this continuity purpose. And they're also, of course, going to have to show that Combs was involved in the conspiracy, that it was an actual agreement that he had. It doesn't have to be in writing. It doesn't have to be, written in blood. It's got to be an agreement, an understanding, even informal, with at least one other person, that this is how the structure of the organization would be running. And the organization can be a legitimate organization, but has illegitimate goals. And the government is alleging that this was a structured community that Combs ran, that people abided by his wishes. He directed that the abuse occur. He directed that these freak-offs occur, that people cleaned up for him, that people bribed for him, that people committed arson for him, they burglarized for him, all in support of the organization. It can't just be random, unrelated acts. They have to be related conduct, these predicate acts. And the government's alleging all of this stuff together was in order for Combs to maintain his hierarchy, to maintain the enterprise.
And the prosecution's still presenting their case, but when Combs's team gets up there to present his defense, how do you defend a case like this?
Well, I was one of the lawyers in Combs's first case in 2001, representing a co-defendant in the case, and we were lucky not to have to deal with this type of RICO issue. But the defense is kind of the same. They're going to be alleging that the Combs's abuse, which they admitted on their opening statement existed, was domestic in nature. This is just a horrible way that he behaved. He's a bad guy. He's a creep, all of those things. But they're going to have to try and show that the acts were consensual, that there was no pattern, no conduct, and no hierarchy, and Combs was not directing this conduct.
Michael Bachner, thank you so much for being with us. Still ahead, the legal strategy behind the defense's request for a mistrial and why the judge may have denied it. Also ahead, will Diddy take the stand? We're answering some of the top questions people are asking about the trial online. Stay with us. Welcome back to ABC News Live. Day 11 of testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. A celebrity stylist to a Los Angeles Fire Department arson investigator, all taking the stand. Let's get right into breaking down the key legal strategies that we saw playing out in court. Brian Buckmeyer playing the defense, Bernardo Villalona playing prosecutor. Brian, let's start with you. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. The fingerprint evidence from the break-in at Kid Cudi's house. It caused a whole thing in court today. Why did that cause such a stir?
Because the insinuation that the defense made that the government was attempting to do, that there were fingerprints, clearly no one knew who they connected with, that were on the glass of the Kid Cudi's home, and also that we just heard that there were fingerprints on the Porsche 911. It was insinuated that at some point in time they were going to cross-reference them and see who it was. You know, Sean Combs was accused of burglarizing Kid Cudi's home, and then it got to the point of like, okay, it's destroyed. How do these people get destroyed? And it kept going and going and going to the point it's like, where are you trying to land this plane? And when they got to the point of asking, is it unusual for these to be destroyed? That's when the defense jumped up and said, we can see where you're trying to land this plane, and that's improper. And that's why they brought up the mistrial. And I think whenever you have an opportunity to argue mistrial, you do it, because you don't know if it's going to work in this trial or on appeal. We've seen cases like the Rust case with Alec Baldwin, where a mistrial argument actually led to a dismissal. That's what they're hoping for. It doesn't always happen, but you make the argument anyways.
Where were they trying to land the plane?
I don't know.
For the prosecution, when you see something like this happen, does this worry you at all that this could come back to haunt you later?
Yes, but usually when you're the prosecutor and you're the person that's trying the case, your goal is to get the conviction and let someone else deal with the appeal. But I would say I was in a courtroom when this happened, and literally there were gasps in the air in the sense of that the person I was sitting next, we started looking at each other and we were looking at the jury. In terms of the defense asked for a mistrial, but that was later on, not in the presence of the jury. But it was clear from how the questions were going that the insinuation was that someone in Diddy's camp was responsible for getting rid of those fingerprint cards, especially when you take into account Capricorn Clark had testified that she had this conversation with Harve Pierre, who's in the defense's camp, shortly before she got fired, which was around the time of when this fingerprint card disappeared. Oh. So huge concern for the prosecution, but this prosecution is not thinking about it because their goal is to get a conviction, not to worry about the appeal.
All right, look, the credibility of the arson investigator also seemed to be something the defense was sort of trying to make an issue today. Why? What was the issue here?
Well, this is how it works when it comes to credibility. If you don't have the facts, you argue the law. If you don't have the law or the facts, you argue credibility. And when it comes to this investigation, you're trying to say this investigation was steered by Kid Cudi. There is clearly a black glove inside of that car. It's the crime scene. Why would you not test it? What, because the person told you not to test it? That's not how law enforcement operates. Now, are you making a mountain out of a molehill? Absolutely. But this is why we put on nice suits and become defense attorneys, because sometimes those mountains do get acquittals. And so you're going to try to get that one person on the jury to be like, you know what? Yeah, they should have checked that glove. And because they did it, I'm not quite sure of this predicate act. And that's how you try to walk your way to an acquittal.
Your response?
So in terms of the glove, I wasn't concerned about it because during redirect, the prosecution immediately went and asked this investigator, was like, look, is there a reason why you didn't find that the glove was of importance? And the investigator was like, of course, because the owner of the car said it's my glove. Obviously, he didn't set his own car on fire.
How is that obvious unless you test the glove?
It's his glove. He's not going to burn his own car. An entire investigation, so it's not relevant to the investigation.
Yes, no one's ever burned their own property before in the whole history of America.
Okay. All right, let's move on to this next issue. The celebrity stylist that took the stand, he said he heard Combs tell Ventura, quote, he would beat her. If you're the defense, you hear him say that, what are you thinking?
I think similar to what we saw in other witnesses, you avoid that conversation and you try to go somewhere else. Because I think when it comes to Deonte Nash, he was a phenomenal witness for the government in trying to show coercion and control and the assault. I mean, when they're talking about Cassie hearing that Sean Combs is downstairs and trying to jump off of a balcony, you try to avoid that and you try to focus on other issues of this case where you're going to try to paint the relationship with Cassie and Sean Combs as toxic, equally using drugs drugs. You're going to try to continue down that path of these are two individuals who are in the thralls of drug abuse and domestic violence, and this isn't trafficking. This is domestic violence. You try to pivot how you're going to talk about that conversation.
How does Deonte Nash help the prosecution?
Deonte Nash played a crucial part in the prosecution's case today. And Deonte Nash was, number one, able to corroborate the violence. Number two, corroborate the control that Sean Combs had over her career. But number three, also corroborated the sense that for the first time, you're hearing that Cassie had told someone that, look, I did not want to participate in the freak-offs. I did not want to go to the hotel. So instead of the jury trying to infer that that's what she felt and didn't want to participate in this freak-offs, now you have it coming out of her own mouth. While it's taking place, she's telling someone else. And Deonte Nash came off very credible. But I want to spin off to another question that was asked of Deonte Nash, that was asked during cross-examination, and which was a bombshell for the defense. When asked whether Deonte Nash, whether he was an employee of the enterprise, yes. He got paid by Bad Boy, yes. Did you participate in any criminal activity under Mr. Combs? Yes. Huge bombshell, because now you have the criminal enterprise and people acting and committing crimes under that criminal enterprise. They weren't expecting that answer.
Did they say what he did? Did he say?
No, they moved on fast from it because that is a bombshell. They asked a question that they didn't know the answer to.
Which is a cardinal sin for any defense attorney. If you don't know the answer, don't ask a question, because you get stuff like that could bury your case.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Brian Buckmeyer, Bernardo Villalona, thank you both for being with us. Coming up, will Diddy take the stand? We're answering some of the top questions people are asking about the trial online when we come back. Welcome back. There is so much interest in this trial. We're taking a look at some of the top searches online. Some of today's biggest search terms include Deonte Nash's testimony, will Diddy testify, what is a mistrial, and Cassie gives birth. ABC News contributor Kelly Carter joins us now from Los Angeles. She covers entertainment and pop culture for us. So the question that we've seen a lot of people searching, will Diddy testify? I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
I mean, question that needs an answer. Everyone wants to know, are we going to actually hear from Sean Combs himself? I think part of this is this idea of, you know, there's his side, her side, the truth. They want to hear what he has to say. So let's see. It remains to be seen. We don't know that answer just yet.
People are also searching, what is a mistrial?
You know, I've said this before. This all is reminiscent of the People versus OJ. People are learning in real time, you know, about the American justice system and learning, you know, terms like what a mistrial is. That would have effectively meant everything would have had the reset button. We would have had to start over. I don't think that anyone working on this trial really wants that.
And we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Cassie gives birth.
Cassie is a new mom again, ×3, which again reminds us how close to delivering she was when she actually was on the stand 2 weeks ago.
Kelly Carter, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back with new episodes every day of the trial on ABC News Live, Disney Plus, and Hulu at 5:30 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. And make sure to follow our podcast, Bad Rap, The Case Against Diddy, hosted by our own Brian Buckmeyer on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'm Eva Pilgrim in New York. Have a good rest of your day.